All right. So to finish this up, guys, today we're going to talk about elasticity, okay, of supply and demand. Now, when you think of elastic, what do you think of? Things that'll stretch, okay? So the more elastic it is, what we're going to get at today, the more things or the more products that we find to be elastic have more of a price change or price stretch to them. People will adapt more to that price. If it's inelastic, then people aren't going to change the way they consume it, okay? So the biggest thing today is just to know what elasticity and inelasticity mean. And then I'm going to give you a couple of examples of it, and then that should help it make sense, all right? So key questions that we need to take away from today, very simply, is what is elasticity? I think we've already got that part written down, right? Then what determines elasticity of demand and price elasticity of supply. So again, I'm just going to go through these like we were doing it the other day, and if you don't have something down, make sure you get it. So elasticity as a definition describes the degree to which buyers and sellers respond to a price change. So it describes, and I need to jot this down for the people online, it describes the degree to which buyers and sellers respond to price change. And again, buyers and sellers are going to respond to price change in different ways depending on the product. If it is something we all use and the price goes way up on it, the elasticity of that's going to be quite significant. You guys understand that? But if it's a price change on like a Mercedes-Benz, not many people are going to be able to afford that, right? So the price change isn't going to affect as many people, making it inelastic. Y'all understand that? So, again, elasticity describes the degree to which buyers and sellers respond to a price change, okay? Now, the next part here, I don't know if we wrote it down, but we need to. It says the more elastic the supply or demand, the more responsive consumers and producers are to changes. So I would put down the more elastic. Did we get this down the other day?
Yeah.
Okay. So the more elastic, the more responsive buyers and sellers are. And that is also vice versa. The less elastic, the less we are to change it, okay? So, and then we can do the same thing with the less elastic. If it's less elastic, then it's less responsive. Okay, and again, guys, this is fairly simple, so hopefully it makes some sense. So what determines the price elasticity of the demand, okay? So price of it, and this sounds weird the way it's written, so just kind of keep up with it. It says price is elastic to demand is typical for goods or services that are luxuries or have good substitutes, okay? It says expensive cars or brand of soft drink. But prices are inelastic, typical of goods or services that are necessities, okay? They have no good substitutes. So basically, guys, what we're saying is the price can stretch, okay? And people will respond more to an elastic product simply because we all want it. Like if Mountain Dew goes up from $3 to $7 for a pack of 12, people are going to respond to that. They're going to buy other types of soft drinks because they have the choice. You guys get that? So that makes it elastic. An inelastic idea, it says like insulin, electricity, or salt. Those are necessities. You understand what I mean? So people are going to buy those regardless of the price change because they have to have it. Okay? So, in my notes, I'll put down that demand is typical for goods and services that are luxuries and have no good substitutes. So that would be elastic. Okay? I would put down the word elastic for demand. And then I would put down that that is equal to goods and services that are luxuries. or they have a good substitute. Okay? Because if it's elastic, that means it stretches. We can find something else. We'll make them bring the price down over time. Y'all with me? It's inelastic for demand. Is when there are no good substitutes. Can you guys tell me something else that doesn't have a good substitute that could be a necessity?
Water.
Well, yeah, obviously water. They make different brands of water, but yeah, could be. Insulin, electricity, salt. What's something else you have to have in your household?
Money. Food.
Yeah, certain types of food. You guys get what I'm getting at here. There's no good substitute, then it's inelastic. And I would jot down those examples, like electricity. Okay? So it's elastic if you have good substitutes. It's inelastic if there are no good substitutes. Is everybody with me there? Does that make sense? Okay. The next part, we're doing the same thing for demand. So it says, what determines the price elasticity, of supply? What determines price elasticity of supply? It says it's determined by the availability of raw materials needed for production, available production for capacity, and the time period required to produce more goods and services. Now, besides all that, it says, for example, the supply of seats in a football stadium is fixed. And you guys understand what I mean by that. It could be a baseball stadium, soccer, whatever. Each field is going to have X amount of seats, right? So that is fixed. So thus the supply is inelastic, meaning you're going to have higher prices. There's no good substitute for that. You're going to have 50,000 people in this stadium, whether it's a huge game or whether it's just another run-of-the-mill game. There's only so many people you can put in it. So there's no good substitute. I can't add on the whim. You understand what I mean? So they're obviously going to offer higher prices for seats closer to the field because they can. Why? There's not but so many seats, and nothing can change that. Okay? So, but then it gives you one that says the supply of lawn mowing services is elastic, meaning that there are good substitutes for that. It says at a higher price, more people will be willing to supply the service. But on the other hand, there will be an increase in the price of strawberries because farmers cannot increase their production immediately. So the supply would be inelastic. So what I'm getting at is if you take lawn mowing and there's 25 people that mow a lawn, you have a good substitute if the guy that's doing your lawn doesn't do it correctly, right? I can find somebody else to do that. I can't if I'm trying to buy strawberries. This guy can only produce X amount of strawberries each year. And if I want more of them, it's going to be hard for me to find them somewhere else. Okay? So we're just going to put the top part down where it says what determines price of elasticity of supply. Put down the availability of raw materials. And I'll just number it, like number 1, available raw materials. Okay, that's 1. The availability of raw materials. The second one, I'll put down time required to produce good or service. And that's how I'd leave it. Time required to produce products. And then let's just jot down a couple examples. for inelasticity of supply. I would put down a fixed amount of stadium seats. That can't be changed unless they do a complete overhaul, right? And then they're not playing games there anyway, so they're not selling any of them. So it's fixed. So the prices will fluctuate, and people will pay more or less depending on if they can get into the game. All right? That makes it inelastic. Okay? Now, if it's elastic, it'd be like lawn mowing. Elastic of supply, or the price of supply, would be like lawn care services. That's not going to be hard to find somebody to fix it if it's wrong, okay? So again, just look at it like this. If it's elastic, we're more responsive to it. We can change it better. If it's less elastic, we are less responsive to it, okay? Elasticity has good substitutes. Inelasticity doesn't. Okay, it's hard to replace what we don't have there. That's why when you get the examples of a stadium, we can't fix the amount of seats in it. So it's inelastic. That's going to charge people more. It's elastic when it comes to lawn care or something like that, simply because we have options. Okay? Does anybody have any questions about that? Pretty simple. Okay. And then the last part of this, I actually threw in the last part of SOL3 where it says price ceiling and price floors. And we'll just jot down what those are because that's all I really need you to know.
Pardon the interruption. We are going to be extending first block, so please disregard the bell when it rings.
I figured they were going to do
We will release you to second block by announcement. Thank you.
So if I were you guys, I would just put price ceiling on this side of the paper and I would put price floor on this side, and then that's how we'll just talk about it. Okay. Now if you guys were just looking at those two words, you would assume that price ceiling means the highest they would set a price for something, right? And the floor would be the low of how low they would set a price. So if we look at price ceiling, it says a price ceiling is the highest price that can be charged for a good or service. So that's the first thing I'd like you to put down. I would put down the highest price charged. Okay. So let's compare it to price floor. If price ceiling is the highest price charged, then price floor would be what? The lowest. So far, so simple. All right, underneath price ceiling, it says the price is generally set below the equilibrium price and results in a shortage. Okay, that's the next part. Put down below equilibrium. I'm under ceiling. They set it below equilibrium and it usually causes a shortage. Okay. Now again, we're comparing and contrasting here. So if a price ceiling is set below equilibrium and causes a shortage, then what do you think a price floor is going to be set at? Above equilibrium. And it's going to create a surplus. Okay? And the example that it gives you for price ceiling, guys, it said, and obviously we're not around this to know because it happens in cities, but you guys take somewhere like New York. It's probably hard to find somewhere to live in New York City because there's a ton of people living in New York City, right? So it says rent control is an example of setting a price ceiling. Some cities, like New York, instituted rent controls when housing prices were rising rapidly and current city residents could no longer afford to rent. Okay? So basically they're outpricing the people living there. They can't afford it. Okay? So rent control has resulted in a shortage of apartments because they require owners to accept a price that is lower than the equilibrium. Well, you guys know as well as I do, if the price is low, what's the demand going to be? It's going to be really high, right? So it's going to create a shortage when you set a price ceiling because they set it below equilibrium, which means people can get it for slower price than what they normally would. So everybody's trying to get there, okay? It says, so in return for that, rather than accept the lower price, owners are often converting the apartments to condominiums and selling them, thus decreasing the supply of available apartments because they're selling them off and let people have it. So just remember, a ceiling is set below the equilibrium price. I know that sounds confusing, but just think of it. Ceiling's got to be below equilibrium. Okay? Now on the other side of that, the price floor is the lowest price charged, but it's going to be set above equilibrium. Now the example it gives for this is that the government wanted to be sure that dairy farmers would be guaranteed a price high enough to keep them in business. Makes sense. If dairy farmers aren't in business, the supply of milk would go way down. Everybody, or most people, use quite a bit of that, right? So in order to keep dairy farmers running, they're going to set a floor above equilibrium price to make those farmers feel like they're getting a great deal. If you feel like you're getting a great deal, will you keep producing a good or service? Yeah, it makes sense, right? So since the price is higher than the equilibrium price, consumers will buy less milk and dairy farmers supply more milk, creating a surplus of milk, meaning that if we ever have an issue, like say we get a big storm coming through, what's people always run to the store for?
Milk.
Bread and milk. There's a reason we keep a surplus of it. Have you ever heard of people running out of milk?
Yeah. Well,
Most of the time you can go get it. Right now, store may run out of it, but it's because they just didn't have enough on hand. The supply of it will be high. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's price ceiling and price floor. Does anybody have any questions about? I know I threw that at you kind of quickly. Is everybody good on that? Does that make sense? All right, I'm gonna let you guys